Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Campus Consortium's EdTalks, featuring Penn State University. Today's topic for EdTalks is Managing the Present-Day University, Strategies for Sustainability, Transformation, and Achieving Excellence. Our presenters include Mr. Lance Kennedy-Phillips, who is the Vice Provost for Planning and Assessment at Penn State, and Mr. Vincent Lamba, Vice President, Community Engagement at Campus Consortium. We will take questions at the end of today's presentation that have been typed into the chat box or questions pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. Without further ado, please allow me to present Mr. Lamba and Mr. Phillips. Over to you, Vincent.
Hey, thank you, Roger, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor for us to have Lance present for us today. For those who have joined us for the webinar, I would like to take a minute to introduce Lance. Lance Kennedy-Phillips is the Vice Provost for Planning and Assessment. As Vice Provost, he's responsible for leading the Office of Planning and Assessment. He provides leadership and support for four essential university functions: institutional research, learning outcomes assessment, accreditation, and strategic planning. Lance has over 20 years of experience in higher education administration and has held positions at DePaul University, the University of Florida, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the Ohio State University. An interesting detail, Lance has authored or co-authored, should I say, 50+ publications on topics ranging from student success to the evolving role of institutional research in higher education. Lance, it's an honor to have you address our audience today. I would like to pass the platform over to you from here on. There you go.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. Can you hear me okay, Vincent?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I just want to do one more check before I get started. Well, good to be here, everyone. And I want to take a moment to definitely thank Campus Consortium for the opportunity to share some of the experiences we've had at Penn State when we look at this notion of the present-day university. I'm going to have a very specific focus in this talk, and that's going to be around student success. But I hope that from that topic, we can kind of expand out, and I look forward to actually having a dialogue with everyone at the end of this presentation. But for now, let me just give you a quick roadmap to where we're at and what's going to kind of move us forward. Again, we're talking about the present-day university, and it's a very interesting time for higher education, and I look forward to exploring some of the challenges we're seeing right now, and then also some of the attitudes that we're facing in American higher education. But our roadmap looks like this. I want to talk a little bit about student success. I think that's the most, if you want to talk to modern, anytime we want to talk about a university, we should be talking about the students, and they're the center to what we do. And if we look at their success, I think that's the best measure of institutional success you can have. From there, I want to talk about building a culture of success, and just briefly go through what we call the 4 C's, or the 4 components to a strong culture of success. And when we think about having a culture of success, we want to make sure that you're strategically planning for that success. And so I want to give you kind of our model for strategic planning, is particularly around how we look at student success and how we look at the goals and thematic priorities of the university. The foundation for any culture or process or organization or university should be data. So I want to share the McLaughlin and Howard data-informed decision circles. I think they really help kind of ground what we've talked about. So what we'll talk about for the next 30 or 40 minutes, just to see there are various stakeholders when it comes to thinking about data. And when we think about having the best decisions we can towards providing the programs and services that our students need, we want to have good sound data to do that. And I think Jared McLaughlin and Rich Howard put together a nice diagram to kind of show how that data should flow through an institution. While we're doing questions, I always like to I've gathered a few quotes over the years, and I always leave that on our question side as kind of my things to know before you go. And I just want to share that with the group as well. So let's think about this present day university. And when you think about the present day university, and you really want to think about what are some of the attitudes towards higher education today. And I have 7 photos up here that really, in my mind, demonstrate what I've heard and seen in my career and really a lot in my role right now at Penn State of how people look at higher education, both internal to the university and external to the university. That first photo is always a fun one to talk about because it really demonstrates what some people see as just the overwhelming bureaucracy of higher education. And so some attitudes of higher ed are real focused on it's hard to get things done. It's hard to be innovative. There's this notion of there's so much bureaucracy, we really can't move as fast as they do in industry. And that is true. But I do believe, and we'll talk about this, that there are a lot of differences between higher education and industry, and sometimes we should move as fast as they do in industry. But that first photo is I think, something, an attitude that's very popular out there about the higher ed bureaucracy and how overwhelming it can be. The second photo is a happy dog, and you know what? It really, when I look at this photo, it really reminds me of our alumni. And how alumni really love their university, and they're always loyal to their university. And so many times you'll see the university, and they may be having troubles. We've had our problems at Penn State. You see them at other universities as well. And the alumni are really a place where you can always turn to. And there's a group that you always turn to that you know will be loyal, and they know they will help guide you in the right direction to bring your university back to whatever footing it needs to come back to. So one attitude towards higher education is that loyalty that your alumni feel towards the university. This third photo here is kind of my favorite. And if you heard from my introduction, I really do have a focus on student success and students and student growth and development. And this one is kind of my special one because it really does talk to my attitude towards higher education, which is that we're here to help students grow, help students develop, not only develop their skills they need for their career attainment, but also help them develop the skills they need to be productive citizens. And so I do believe that, and I think there are others that believe this as well, is that higher education has an opportunity to help students grow and develop and learn in a productive environment. This next one is one that I think is real, and it's something that's happening right now, and it's the folks that actually question higher ed. Is it worth it? You know, do people need to get an education? Do people need to go to college? You're hearing it more and more, and especially if you think about present day attitudes, this is one that you are actually hearing quite a bit. Is college worth it? Is it worth the investment? And for these folks, you know, I think it's important, especially when we talk about data, what their question is real. The question is very real. Is higher ed worth it? I mean, and so how do we talk about the value of higher education for the folks that, you know, help me understand if I can believe this or not? And so I like this fourth photo because it does kind of say there are people out there who want to question the value of higher education, and it should be on us. If we're creating the proper structures, if we're doing the proper assessments, we should be able to demonstrate the value of higher education with our data and with our processes. And so I think that's important. I'm glad there are people out there like that. When I talk to my faculty colleagues, they bring me always back to, Lance, it's about knowledge. And you know, it's about knowledge creation, higher education, our attitude to higher education, that they have a role in creating knowledge using data to help improve society. And that's what you see there with my pie example. It's kind of, that's, you know, it's pie, you know, pie, you know what I mean. And so I think that idea is very important, is that higher education does have a responsibility to help increase and produce knowledge and to do research, to put data out there that can address some of the issues of society. And so there are people with attitudes who do believe that. This next photo is interesting because I'm going to talk later about the changing demographics in higher education. And I still believe there's a group of students out there that are struggling right now, trying to climb upstream. And I think it's usually mainly, you know, socioeconomically, are those students that are in our lower socioeconomic categories, our students of color, are still struggling to find that success. And it's always a battle going upstream. And again, it's another attitude you hear about higher education, is that it's tough. It's tough for majority students and minority and students of color, and I think that's something that this picture really demonstrates to me, is that we had to keep helping students persevere, to keep battling upstream, but you can get there, just like I think this fish will do one day. And finally, to end it on a positive note, as far as the attitudes of higher education, a lot of people I talk to still believe that our universities and our colleges are a place for discourse, a place for thought, a place to explore ideas, and that's a positive. And we don't want to lose that. I welcome the debate about freedom of speech and academic freedom. I think it's important and healthy to have that debate, but it should be a productive one. And I think our universities play an important role in helping us have those productive discussions. And so that's what my little my chimpanzee is doing right now, is just having that thoughtful discussion and discourse about almost anything. So that was just kind of a primer on what I think some of the attitudes are today in higher education. You can't talk about attitudes in higher education without talking about the Internet of Things. And the Internet is so important to the discussion around higher education. The Internet is very important to, and social media, to perceptions of higher education. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. This is just a great, actually, I just threw this slide in on Monday because I saw our marketing folks do it in a presentation they did, and I thought it was a wonderful way to say, I talked to you about attitudes in that previous slide. The thing that really can feed our attitudes about higher education in positive and negative ways is going to be social media and the Internet. When I talk to colleagues about getting engaged in social media, it's one of those things you have to commit to it. You want to be involved in it. You can see the impact if you look around this circle. I think this came from Laurel Lewis, and their Twitter handles are right here, officially Chad. So we want to give them credit. But this was really, I think, a good demonstration. In 60 seconds, look at the engagement that an institution can possibly have with the larger community. And I think that's an important piece to think about when you think about the perceptions of higher education. But let's keep it back to where we're at. What's visible when we think about the real challenges facing higher education today. On the visible side, you see what we know are some of the challenges that you see in the headlines. Things like, small colleges are struggling and some are closing because of financial issues. We're seeing issues with Title IX and sexual assault, and at our university, we've had our share of fraternity and sorority issues that we've had to deal with, and I think we have dealt with very well. And I think it's, there are always questions from our legislators and questions from the media and questions from parents about the value of higher education. Those are always going to be challenges that we have to face, but that's what's visible. And I love this iceberg idea. I got it from our CIO, because he talks about it from a IT perspective and the challenges that we face. I actually looked at it and said that could be this is a great demonstration of the challenges we face in higher education. And some of the issues are real, but you think about the headline issues of what's visible, but all the stuff underneath is what we really should be focusing on and thinking about this from perspective of the silos that we operate in higher education. I mentioned the financial struggles for small colleges. There are financial struggles for universities of all sizes, but particularly public universities that are still that are very dependent on state funds and taxpayer funding for higher education. I have an interesting slide later to talk to you about how we're seeing a dramatic decrease in the funding for public higher education in our country. Expectations are always evolving about the role of higher education. Mainly we think about higher education as a way to help our students learn and give them an opportunity to have successful careers. Some people see higher education as a place for us to do research, to help, just look at some of the issues in society and answer those. And some people say it is. It's about getting a job. It really is. You get higher education to get a job. And so those expectations are always there for higher education. But another thing that's changing, another challenge for higher ed, is the changing demographics. And the reason it's a challenge is if you look at those last 4 points I make, it's because we're slow to change in higher education. We're slow to innovate. And so when you see the changes in our demographics, but we're still using like what I would say a legacy type thinking when it comes to how we manage and develop our programs and services, that's a scary thought. And so, we do lack the ability for higher education to change and move quickly to address the changing demographics of our students. And some of that is because of the complexity of American higher education. The challenges we face are in some ways because of how we're structured. Many of us work on campuses and universities that follow a model of shared governance, and that's a very important thing. But when you follow that model of shared governance, it takes a little more time for decisions to be made. It takes a little more time for changes to happen. And to communicate those changes across complex organizations. So there are quite a few challenges that we face in American higher education that I wanted to kind of lay out here for the group. But when you think about it, we always come back to our students and student success. And so no matter what our challenges are, our goal is still to help our students be successful. And when I talk about success, I'm really focusing on helping students matriculate, retain those students so that they can eventually graduate from university. So looking at retention and graduation as the key to how we measure success for our students. There are a lot of different variables in between there, from learning work skills and learning job skills to just learning, critical thinking skills and other skills that just may help those softer skills that our employers find very important. But ultimately, what we're looking at when I talk about student success is how do we help students stay in college and then eventually graduate from college. I talked earlier about the changing demographics of higher education, and I love this chart here from Witchy. And I think it's important to note that this is actually only, I think it's like a 30-year model here that I'm looking at from 1997 to 2027. So back when I was in college in 1997, it was 72% of white majority and then about 28% or so of students of color. And now that you're starting to see this, by the time my son graduates from college, I hope, you'll see by 2027 that there's almost a 50-50 split in the pipeline of students that are coming into college. And this is important to note from a success perspective, because we need to be thinking about what programs and services we put in place to help our students be successful. And the programs and services that were in place when I was in college in 1996 may not be the same and cannot be the same programs and services that help my son as he goes through college in 2026. And so I think these are some of the issues that we face, and it's a good problem to have. Let me clarify this. I mean, it's the diversifying higher education, I think, is a wonderful thing that's happening. But we as an institution, or all of us as institutions of higher ed, have to be willing to change and to rethink our structure so that we help our students succeed. So when you think about this notion of success, how do we get there? The question is, what are the predictors of success? And those predictors are, there are a lot of different things that we believe impact student success. And I'm going to spend part of the next 5 to 10 minutes going through a couple of models to just kind of demonstrate my thinking around this notion of student success. And, the first thing that we know from literature and from the research is that the more engaged our students are in the university community, the more likely they are to be successful. And this is where you think about that notion of our title about the structures and strategies that we have in place, the strategies that we use to engage our students, not only in the programs like this big program here. I think this is a photo from Ohio State. Like this large program they have with all these students together, but even the ways we engage with students in electronic ways as well. How we engage our students and help them feel connected to the university is so important, and so important to their success. And I think right now the research is calling it that notion of a sense of belonging. The more the students feel connected and belonging to their university, the more likely they are to be retained and to graduate. A few years ago, George Koo and his colleagues in Indiana came up with what's been known as the high impact practices of education, of higher education. And these next two photos kind of demonstrate two of those as predictors of success. I think, students can participate in service learning, and students participating in study abroad are very important to the notion of student success and as a predictor of student success, just along with internships and on-campus employment is just as important. Undergraduate research is important. And if you think about that first point I made about students being engaged and feeling a sense of belonging, think about how when you engage in those high-impact practices, you increase that notion of a sense of belonging to the university. Now, on the flip side of this high-impact practice, and there's an interesting article and an interesting debate going on right now. I think the article came out a couple of years ago, and it was by Sean. I'll send the name out too. But it was an article actually looking at, high impact practices are important, but what about the students in the lower socioeconomic areas who can't afford to study abroad? Students who can't afford to take time off to do service learning. And my response to that, because I still believe in the notion of high impact practices, so my response to that is, institutions, as you're developing your strategies and your structures, you have to commit the resources to help these students succeed. And I use Ohio State here as an example because they have a program called the Second Year Transformational Experience Program, where they've actually invested in faculty mentors and students so that they can be engaged. And I don't even have to call them high impact practices, so they can be in these engaged scholarship practices, so the students can be more engaged in the university. And I think that's where we have to think about our university. We think about student success, and we have to make the resources. We have to make the investment. Here at Penn State, we, as part of our capital campaign, have made engaged scholarship, which has many of the same ideas of high impact practices, an important aspect of what we reach out to donors for various scholarships for access, various scholarships for engagement. And I think, again, seeing institutions make those priorities is going to be so important. But you look at that last photo here in the corner on predictors of student success, and the true predictor of student success, and I've done the research on it, other folks have done the same research, is this notion of engagement with the faculty. There's no greater predictor in student success than making sure our students are engaged with faculty, but not only inside the classroom, but outside of the classroom too. And so that how we engage our students with our faculty is so important for that sense of belonging. Having faculty members leading some of those high impact practices, and then just having students have that mentoring time with faculty is a key predictor to our student success. When you think about the student success, it's really notion of this whole student experience. Think about those 4 photos I showed you earlier. The idea behind those 4 photos is this: we're looking at our students or our students are looking at the university as the university or the college. They don't look at our university as academic affairs, IT, governmental affairs, student life. They really just care about their part of the university. And so as we think about the university, we should be thinking about how do we see ourselves as one coin. So there's so many aspects to the student experience we need to pay attention to, but really the university is just one coin. There are various sides to that coin sometimes. Sometimes it's the academic affairs side that's necessary. Sometimes it's the student affairs side that's necessary, but we're all looking at that whole student experience as we think about taking down some of those barriers. And it's important when we think, I'm gonna talk later about strategic planning, is that we try to plan where we're planning around or to break down the silos that our students are experiencing. So when we think about the whole student experience, we want them to see this is just the university, and the experiences you're having are, you don't have to understand the organizational chart of Penn State to know how to get the resources and support you need either inside or outside of the classroom. So that whole student experience is very important. Darcy Oaks wrote in 2009, or actually 2008, about this notion of transformative learning. And it's an important notion because what Darcy said was, think about all the things, he didn't say this like out loud, but he was probably saying, think about the things Lance just said. Curricular, the inside and outside of the classroom experience, engaging students in success is going to be very important. But then he brought in a third element. And the third element he brought into this model, his transformative learning model, was the student's assumptions. And what that's saying is that think about the options you offer as a university on the curricular side and the co-curricular side, but also think about the life experiences and the beliefs that our students bring in. And now I'm tying it back to our discussion about the changing demographics. So when we think about those changing demographics, if we stay within our traditional curricular options and our traditional co-curricular options, and we don't take into account the student assumptions, we've already marginalized a population of our students that we want to see be successful, because those programs may not have been designed or developed to support them. And so the notion of the challenge, if you think about bringing those three areas together, that true sweet spot of student success is right there in the middle. And the student assumptions, I think, are so important to this discussion and so key to helping an institution move forward in the notion of student success. Once we start taking in the student assumptions, the curricular options, the co-curricular options that we have for our students, then we can start moving towards an increased intentionality and the refinement of our programs and services to serve our students. That's a strategy I want you to take away from here, is making sure as you're starting to develop your programs and your structures within your university that you're always using data, and I'll talk about this later, to understand your student population, and then let that data inform the curricular options you're optioning, and let that data inform the co-curricular options and I would be not a good vice provost for planning and assessment if I didn't talk about assessing all of this, as Darcy does in his model. It's very important that we have clear objectives and clear outcomes for these types of programs and services, and we evaluate that not only from an institutional perspective, but also helping students do their own self-reflection so that they're developing the skills that they need and they're policing their own learning. So that's kind of my thought on the student experience piece, but on student success. I'm going to transition just a little bit to talk about an impact on student success and an impact on our universities overall, and that's public funding. When I spoke earlier, about 20 minutes ago, I talked about the idea of our losing funding from our state, from our legislators, and for public institutions losing and the decrease in public funding. This chart here is one I found this on the internet even before I started working at Penn State. It's from PASHE, which is the state higher ed system for Pennsylvania. And it just demonstrates, even 5 or 6 years ago, the dramatic decrease in state funding. And the reason this is so important to me is because the blue line is happening. We know it's happening. But look at that yellow line and look at how, and you think about that tuition and fees, that's a burden that we're now putting on our families, our students to kind of foot the bill for their education. And when you think about that, think about the notion of student success at that point. If I'm paying more for tuition, or if I'm paying tuition, period, to offset what my legislators should be contributing, I want to make sure I'm getting the best return on my investment. So one thing we're focused on here is how do we help students complete in 4 years? I'll be honest, I took 5.5 years to complete college. The norm is almost 6 at this point. So when I was in college, state funding was still at a pretty reasonable level, and my tuition dollars were pretty low. But when my son starts to go to college, those tuition dollars are going to be pretty high for us to pay for. And so I will be looking for programs and structures that help those students graduate in hopefully 4 years, or even less if you can. So I think part of student success is not only retaining the students and helping them graduate, but it's also creating those structures that are so important for them to be able to move through the university at a reasonable and efficient clip, which should be around 4 years. There are a lot of benefits. We use this a lot when we talk to our legislators about just the benefits of American higher education. And I'm actually just going to bring your eyes to that third point right there, which is the 10% return, and that's a conservative estimate on the return of investment for for any state that puts a significant investment in American higher education. I don't think we need to sit here and really talk through this, because there are a lot of you who I think believe as well that this is just an opportunity for American higher education to invest more and actually get a good return on it. You're seeing some states start to turn that tide a little bit, but there are some states that are moving towards almost zero funding for higher education, and I think that's going to have a significant impact on student success. When we think about this idea of success, the thing that stands out to me is we need to have a culture of success. And I think it's important that we build a culture of success if we're going to, and sustain it. Not only build it, but sustain a culture of success as well. Over the years, I've come up with these 4 C's that we call the 4 C's for building a culture of success. And, the first C in there, and those C's are commitment, consistency, communication, and connection. The first C is commitment, and it's a pretty easy one to understand. It's the idea that all levels of the university need to be committed to the success of our students, need to be committed to student success, not only from our frontline staff members and our frontline faculty members who are with the students on a regular basis, even the custodial staff and the important role they play in student success. Everyone understanding and committing to that, to the president of the university or the chancellor of the university, who's out raising funds, being the figurehead for the university to encourage donors and legislators to invest in the university. That commitment is so important across the entire spectrum of the system of higher education. The other idea, though, is also about consistency. And, I always talk about we can't have the year of student success initiatives, and we can't, student success and the idea of success and the structures that we develop has to kind of run through our processes. It has to be front and center in everything we do, and we have to be consistent about it. The idea of creating a year of assessment or a year of success is a notion that's just saying it's not as important as it should be. And it's also lacks consistency. And when you think about it, I'm going to talk about strategic planning in a minute. When you get into your strategic planning ideas, that helps you keep the idea of success in a consistent and real framework of your university, in a consistent and real way in front of the university community, so that student success is always a part of it. When you think about a culture, and we talked about consistency, now let's think about this idea of communication. And one thing that's sometimes missing in a culture of success, a culture of evidence, is the celebration of best practices. And so I always advocate that universities that are really trying to move towards a model of success should celebrate success that may be happening in the smallest department or the largest administrative unit, but let's celebrate how our aspects of our university are actually contributing to student success. So that's one thing. The other thing about communication is also just communicating the value. Many times people want to know, what is the university value when it comes to success? Hearing things like put students first, goal 1 is student success. Those are things that should be communicated not only from our president, but across all various platforms that we have. How do we make sure we're communicating the importance and the vision of student success? So communication is very important. The final C is about connection, and the connection that we have as an institution to each other, and the connection that our programs and services have to each other. And this goes back to the first point I made about silos, and the idea that students see the university as the whole university, or as my college, or as my campus, or they don't really see it in the various silos that we live in. So if we think about the idea of student success, the one thing you want to think about when you think about structures and your organizational chart is, how do we break down the barriers and connect our various programs and services? We do it unintentionally through our strategic planning process and how we fund initiatives, because initiatives at our university have to be cross-university, cross-interdisciplinary, cross-administrative units, and they have to speak to one of our foundational elements when one of those is access and student success. So the institution has to make the effort and put the resources in connecting the work of the institution to success. So you heard me mention our strategic plan. And at Penn State, we have, I always say this isn't the most innovative planning model. It's your basic plan, do, check, act model. And I think but it speaks to how we see strategically we increase and keep moving the notion of student success across the university. We began, like every other plan, with our vision. The vision of our president and our board and our provost kind of shape, who we are as a university, and all of that. And in each of those sectors of our senior leadership, student success is primary in that vision of who we are as a land-grant institution. Those visions are usually grounded in the goals for our senior administrators that we work towards, and they identify specific targets for the administrative units and for the university. When we get into the actual strategic plan aspect, this is the plan of our strategic plan, we've broken that plan out into what we call our foundations, our thematic priorities, and our supporting elements. And what they do is they kind of identify those desired outcomes for the university. Let me just give you briefly, and let me say right now, you can go to strategicplan.psu.edu to see a detailed graphic and a detailed explanation of our planning process. But the foundations are things like student success, diversity, a global community, sustainability. And when we call them foundation, because they cut across everything we do as a university. So we didn't have a diversity goal or diversity strategic plan or diversity plan. Diversity should cut across everything we do. Just as student success should cut across everything that we do. The next aspect, the two aspects of our plan, focus on two areas. One is the outward-facing aspect of our plan, which we call our thematic priorities. These are the ones where we talk about how Penn State will have its impact on the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the nation, and in many ways, we hope the world. And the idea behind the thematic priorities are they're the more outward-facing goals. We have goals or priorities such as transforming education and driving digital innovation and enhancing health. And all those things are still sitting on top of our foundational elements. And I think that's the key to our plan, is that the foundation, particularly our foundation of student success, permeates everything we do from our strategic plan and our capital plan as well. The last aspect of our inward-facing aspect of our strategic plan are what we call our supporting elements. And those elements look at, our organizational processes and our infrastructure development with the idea that you can't sustain your foundation. You can't achieve your thematic priorities if you don't have a strong supporting structure in place. And so making that an active part of our strategic plan was very important. As we moved through the plan and we identified those thematic priorities, we actually did a scan of all of our unit plans to start thinking about where are opportunities, where do we find the connections, and then those plans started to infuse and help identify the action plans that we use to respond to those opportunities. And even the committees that we use with our strategic plan are all interdisciplinary, and really we're pushing the idea of everyone at every level of the university has to be engaged in this plan for it to be successful. We're about 3 years into our strategic planning process right now, so I'm hitting that implementation circle. We've just hit point 5, where we've developed the action plans to respond to those opportunities, and now we're getting to the point of implementing those plans. And so it's where we really start thinking about this notion of organizational alignment. How do we align the organization with our strategic plan, with our strategic priorities, to achieve ultimately what we call student success and what we want to be as a success for our students. Like any plan, you have to get into the assessment and evaluation phase. We'll start hitting that soon, and it's actually starting to play itself out where we're evaluating initiatives that have been started early on in the plan, and we'll evaluate that progress, share results of those, and revise efforts as needed, which is very important for a planning process, particularly if we're thinking about student success. Our demographics are changing regularly, so to make sure your strategic plan is a dynamic plan that is always changing as the needs arise. I always tell people what we thought was important in 2015 may not be as important in 2019, so we have to always have a dynamic plan in place to do that. The last piece here, and I'm already hitting the 240 mark. This thing can go quickly. The last piece I wanted to talk about, and I'd love to open up for questions, is the foundation of any culture, planning process, vision for an institution is data, and the data-informed decisions and a quality decision-making. I'm noticing that the colors on the circles aren't as clear, so I'll try to read through them. But this was developed by McLaughlin and Howard, I think in 2002, and I can get that actual reference out there, out to the group. But the key here for the data-informed decisions is that there are various players and folks at the university who have to be involved in this process throughout. And first we think about those custodians of the data. And many of you, I think, play this role of the custodian of the data when it comes to who's collecting the data and storing the data, and actually even moving into that next circle of working with the producers and the brokers of the data. Maybe some people call those your analysts or business users who work with the custodians to structure the data in a way that's easy for them to do analysis. And based on that structuring of the data and the analysis they've conducted, they can deliver that information to users who work with decision makers. So turning that data that's been restructured and restructured into information, turn it into knowledge that can ultimately be used to influence decisions. And that's where the decision makers and the users come into play. Quality decision making comes from a sound quality data process. And for any institution to even start thinking about looking at student success, you have to be thinking about what data do we know about our students. So looking at your student ERP that's bringing in all the data on student academic characteristics and student involvement on campus. Those data are sitting with custodians and student affairs, the registrar's office, admissions, and they're helping and working with folks like myself in the IR office who are looking at those data, analyzing those data, and so even helping talk about what are the requirements for structuring those data around student success so that I can share what I've learned with the decision makers at the university, and we can take that information on, graduation rates. We can take the information on student progress towards degree, and share that information with decision makers who can then identify the concepts and identify the programs and services they need to improve. And that's really what these decision circles are about. Is everyone at the university at some point is going to touch data, and we bring it back to student success. They're going to touch data that will influence the programs, services, and structures we develop for student success. So I'm ending on the idea of data, and data feeds into quality decision making, and it's really important for an institution. To wrap this up and to bring it back to student success, if we think about the university and the present day university, when we start developing structures and developing our strategic plans and looking at the programs and services we offer, we need to always have in mind our number one constituency, and that's our students. And any structure we develop, if we're going to have excellence, the excellence will be measured by the quality of the experiences that you have with your students and that your students have at your university. I'm going to stop there. Open it up for questions. Here's some of my quotes that I mentioned before, and I think we're at the 244 mark. So I will turn it over to Vincent, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Lance. Okay, we are going to take questions now. So, if anybody has any question for Lance, feel free to send us a question in the questions panel. It's on, of course, it's on the right side. You can just click on questions and type your question and send it over to us. We're getting one question already from Jeff from Limestone College. He's referring to small colleges, Lance. He's saying, Many schools face limited resources, but small colleges feel this strain most. Declining numbers of high school graduates, especially in the Midwest and Northeast, mean that enrollment crises are already small budgets at many colleges. So in your opinion, student success is trying to figure out how to, use those resources more effectively or efficiently. My question, he's saying, is where do you focus your attention efforts? Where do you have those conversations with students?
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much for that question. I actually began my career at a small college at Nebraska Wesleyan University. And I think that where we focused our energy on student success was about these transferable skills. And so we really did focus on this. While there are a lot of different ways for us to help our students be successful within the classroom, what we know is that our employers are looking for students to have the transferable skills that they need to be successful. So helping students get involved in leadership opportunities was something we really focused heavily on. We at Nebraska Wesleyan actually developed we actually had a 4-year live-in requirement because we also know that living on campus can help develop some of those skills as well. So I think that's what we focus with our students and student success at a small university was how do we help our students develop those transferable skills that they're going to need to move into the workforce. And it actually became part of our marketing. And that's how we recruited students too, is like we're teaching you skills for life. And so I think that's where we really put our emphasis.
Thank you, Lance. And thank you, Jeff. I hope Lance has addressed or answered your question to your satisfaction. There's another question from Michael. Mike, in fact, from Masbay. He's asking, if we can have a copy of this presentation. Lance, you're okay to share your presentation with everybody in the audience today? Yeah.
That would be great. I look forward to it.
Sure. So we will be happy to share the presentation with all the attendees today. And Michael, you should get your copy as well. Okay. Any more questions? I guess not. So I guess we've come to the end of today's session then, and I would like to thank Lance for presenting, for us here today. It's an honor for us to have you here today, Lance. I would like to thank our audience also for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. So just before we go, just want to go through a couple of slides, and I also want everybody to know that Campus Consortium has been dedicated to hosting these kind of EdTalks to bring contribution to the higher ed community. Our next EdTalks will feature Philip Long. He's a former associate vice provost for learning science at the University of Texas Austin, UT Austin, that is. So who will share his expertise on the next step after blockchain basics. It is scheduled from July 24th from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. We'll be sending out the invite for that EdTalks shortly. Just before we call this a wrap, I would like to go over my last slides about Campus Consortium and sign off for the day. So for everyone who has joined us today, I would like to let you know that Campus Consortium has been running a lot of initiatives and programs to help higher ed, and one of them has been grant programs, as you can see on your screen. We have already awarded more than 10.1 million since January last year in grants, including attendance tracking, campus portal, campus safety, mobile campus grant, as you can see, single sign-on, and identity grant for provisioning and deprovisioning. If you use this from your ERP system, whether it's Banner, PeopleSoft, or Colleague into AD or into emails. After hours, IT help desk support for, institutions looking for help desk support for, students who can call after 5 p.m. in the evening, weekends, holidays, who are looking to expand into distance learning. So we partner with technology partners who can offer you, can deliver these projects for you, and of course, Campus Consortium will fund these projects Some projects are 50% funded, some are 100%, like Mobile Campus. We like to give mobile apps, absolutely for free as it relates to licensing and implementation. Our deadline, on these various grants are, June 18th for mobile, June 18th for portal grant, single sign-on, and after hours IT help desk is June 26th. We have a whole bunch of awardees, and you will be seeing on our social media sites from time to time. We want to do well for them. We want to help them out in whatever way we can. Moving forward, for these grants, we cover, like I said earlier, implementation and licensing cost in few categories. This is also open to public sector organizations, K-12 institutions as well. What we need is, in order to give out these grants to institutions, just to know that they demonstrate commitment that really require the solution on campus, and we are willing to help them out. These are other, grants that we'll be launching soon. Blue Light app for campus safety. Students can just contact their guardians, their parents by click of a button. Cloud hosting, we partnered with AWS and we partnered with Azure, Microsoft, to host your banner, any ERP, LMS, whatever you want. Artificial intelligence as well for password resets or enrollment, password manager and MFA grant, multi-factor authorization for your students to be able to reset their passwords. So these are some of the grants that we'll be launching soon. So if you want to apply, you can visit our website at campusconsortium.org or simply submit your grant application at grantapplication@campusconsortium.org. You will receive this deck in the form of an email after the session is concluded. If you have any questions or you want to connect with Lance, you can simply send an email to us at info@campusconsortium.org. Once again, thank you to our wonderful audience today. We had close to 60 to 70 institutions who were dialed in, so thank you. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. This is Vincent on behalf of Campus Consortium signing off. And thank you, Lance, once again for your time.